All right, so did everybody have a chance to, if you weren't here, to listen to that video, watch the video on that argument, the moral argument for God's existence? That's where we left off, right? All right, so again, you kind of had to do some homework in the sense of if you wanted to look up any particular objections to that immediately, that kind of argument, because again, your book just doesn't give any, aside from the Euthyphro dilemma. But I don't know if we're going to talk about the Euthyphro dilemma, which stretches back to the time of Plato in a dialogue. I don't know if we're going to talk about that when we get to particular ethical theories, or if we want to talk about that now. But does anybody have any questions, at least in regard to the moral argument? Like maybe even what it's supposed to say, what it's supposed to prove, or an objection, or just anything you want to say for or against it. Anybody have anything in regards to that? Go ahead before we watch something else.
Everyone, like, there are some kind of basic ideas that most people would agree with, but morality is so, like, people have such different ideas on morality that it isn't really to say that because there's such thing as morality and God exists. I don't think that's a good comment. I don't think that's a good point.
Okay.
Like, everyone's ideas of moral can be different.
All right, so let's go back. Well, one, the theists would say that there just has to be one objective truth, right? They could say everything could be wrong, or not everything could be wrong in the moral sense, but intellectual sense. Everyone could be wrong, but if there's one objective truth, if there's just one that's objectively true for all people at all places at all times, no matter what you think, believe, whatever the case may be, they would say that's all that's needed for that argument to go through, even if there's just one. Right? Now, why would they say that? Because what was the point? You're about to see another example of that here. It's one of my favorite videos to watch. It's kind of disturbing, but it kind of tries to drive home that same point. Not that there's a connection between all of us, but because remember, what was the first premise was, if objective rights and wrongs exist, all right, or if objective moral values and duties exist, then God exists, right? So the defense of that first premise was what? What does the theist give to defend that first premise? They show what morality would be under what? Atheism or materialism. And what was the argument there? That morality would be what?
Like in true atheism.
Right, or just pure materialism, just physicalism. Or in other words, the paper we read, just in other words, just an atheistic version of, say, evolution, right? That chance plus time plus matter equals what we are right now, what we've gotten to. So how would just one, even if there were just one, objective truth in regards to morality, why would you just need one? Even if nobody could agree on anything else, even if there's just one. Say, for instance, the example we talked about in class, that a man who kidnaps and rapes and tortures a child. If just even that one thing is objectively wrong or evil. Why? What does the theist say there? Well, you don't even have to even talk about good per se, but you could just say if something is truly, and right here, remember, we mean philosophically, if it's truly evil, then it can't just be what? The result of what you think is right or wrong, right? So, for instance, something like this, like if this is the world, this is the world. Now, and this over here is like a transcendent moral law. And let's say somebody down here is violating that, right? Somebody does something wrong. Let's say our example, they kidnap and rape and torture a child. They're guilty in regards to what? Right, there's something up here that says this person is wrong, right? Now imagine this doesn't exist. Let's say that atheism is true, materialism is true. There's no such thing as this objective standard, right? You're just one. Now let's just minimize this. Here's our world. We're just going to go reverse. Instead of blow it up, we're going to make it smaller. Here's the world. This is the same one. Here's the world. Now multiply this by billions and thousands of these, just everywhere. And there's no transcendent moral law. There's no objective right or wrong. You're just one speck on a speck of 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 a speck. It doesn't matter. There's no right or wrong. You see what I'm saying? So the point is, the theistic argument there is there's no metaphysical grounding for a truly what? Right. There's no metaphysical grounding for it. There's nothing to ground what you say is right or wrong. Why? Because again, if it's just survival of the fittest, if it just is, say, an atheistic account of evolution, right, an atheistic version of evolution, then it just is survival of the fittest, right? But the question the theist would ask is, do you think that's really wrong? So the example we gave, the kidnapping and the raping of the child or whatever, is that really wrong? Truly, is that really absolutely wrong? Regardless of what you think about it, is it wrong? This isn't rhetorical. I'm asking you, is that really wrong? Is that evil to do? Yeah, I don't think that's a trick question. But here's the hard part, is that if you want to say yes, now you've got to find some way to ground that, like metaphysically ground that. And the point of the argument was that an atheistic version of, say, evolution, or on atheism or materialism, how do you ground it? Because what seems to be the problem there?
That if there's just materialism, there's no moral law, there's no...
Well, there may be a moral law, but it's just not what? It's not objective or absolute, right? It's just what you like or don't like. That's just morality. You've just been led to believe that that's right or wrong. So you can still call it right or wrong, right? You can still call it evil, but it's not really what? It's just what you don't like. It's like we're talking about flavors of ice cream. You like vanilla, I like chocolate. But it's not really right or wrong. It's just not socially advantageous. It's just taboo. It's just not something our society likes, so to speak. But it's not overarching absolutely evil, right? And so what did the existentialist atheistic philosophers like Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, or even, Richard Dawkins, those guys, what do they say? Do they agree or disagree? Yeah. Right. They agree that they don't like it, but it's not really wrong. It's not really evil. Other than just what you like or don't like, your preference. Bertrand Russell said the same thing, right? He said, we're just a collocation of atoms. That's all you are. And so when a rock falls and hits another rock, has it done anything immoral? No. It's just atoms bumping into other atoms, right? It might not be good for the other rock in the sense that it breaks or whatever, but there's nothing immoral about the scenario, right? There's nothing immoral about it in some sort of true, absolute sense or whatever. In fact, like we talked about, this is just what happens in the animal kingdom all the time, right? Which, by the way, is one of the weirdest arguments when people try to use the animal kingdom to show something that is or isn't natural. Who's run across that kind of argument before? Look, animals do this, man. This is completely natural. Animals also eat their own shit. Animals also kill the cubs of other animals. Animals also murder each other. You can't derive what is or isn't natural just because animals run around. That's the whole point. We're not animals, right? Or we're not merely animals.
I read a rapist argument showing like rape of animals, and I'm like, but is that who you want to be?
Well, see,
like, if you want to be that.
Now, see, here's another cultural hot button issue. Here's another cultural hot button issue here, is that there's positions in our society right now, popular hot button kind of topic issues. They're like, look, we know this is natural because this goes on in the animal kingdom too. But rape is absolutely normal in the animal kingdom. The killing of a rival offspring is completely normal in the animal kingdom. Again, they eat their own. I mean, like, are we going to derive how we ought to behave or what's right or wrong from the animal kingdom? Seriously?
That's the fallacy, right? The naturalistic.
Well, naturalistic fallacy is from an alt. They would say you can't get an alt. What's an alt? Right. Fallacy is you can't get an alt from what? You can't get an alt from an is. Does that make sense? You can't get an alt from an is. And that's the whole point here with this theistic argument, is that just because something is doesn't mean that you can show that it's right or wrong. It just is. Unless you have some sort of transcendent or absolute or objective standard above and beyond those things. Right? Any other remarks on that? Do you see, Lacey, how the theist is trying to tie that to God? Because they're trying to give it a metaphysical grounding, right? That's the whole point. They're saying that's why you need God. Otherwise, you don't have any grounding. You just have your opinion versus somebody else's opinion. You have this culture versus that culture. So let's say that you have a culture that says it's okay to exterminate Jews or whatever. And then you have a culture that says, no, you can't do this. Well, what judges between the cultures? If there's no moral standard above that goes beyond both cultures, that they're both bound by, then which culture is right? What's that? Yeah. Which culture's right there? They're not. They're neither one. They're neither right nor wrong. Neither one of them. It's just culture against culture, right?
Is that kind of like that whole everyone's right and everyone's right? Where they both think they're right in their own mind, they're both wrong. But one of them has to be wrong in order for things.
Well, they would only have to be wrong, like, logically speaking, if one contradicts the other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same kind of concept as everybody's a hero.
So, but, again, logically speaking, like, one would be right only if they contradict one another, right? Because that's just the truth table in logic. If you've got a contrary or a contradiction, then the falsity of one implies the truthfulness of the other, and vice versa. If the truthfulness of one, if one is true, it just implies the falsity of the other. That's just the truth table, or the square of opposition in logic. But anyway, so if you have two cultures like that, say one that wants to exterminate or wipe out, the Jews, the homosexuals, the gypsies, whoever else, just, destroy them like they did, and then there's no objective right or wrong, and one culture doesn't want to do that, which culture's right, morally speaking?
I was about to say the one that wins the fight.
Neither one, right? Neither one. So if there's no objective right or wrong, if there's no moral standard that goes between the two that they can be judged by, that goes beyond their culture, then say the United States and the Allies had no business going over there and stopping Hitler from doing what he was doing. Why? Because that's just their culture. That's what they do. But if it doesn't matter, if somebody says, but I don't care if that's your culture, you can't wipe out and exterminate you can't commit genocide, then what's happening at that point? They're judging that culture by what? By a standard above themselves, right? They're saying that there has to be a standard that's above your culture. But if that's gone, we wipe that out, like Nietzsche says, and Camus, and Sartre, and Bertrand Russell, and Dawkins, and all those guys. If there's no such thing, then they're not wrong. You just don't like it. You just don't like it. Your culture, this is your culture, so you don't like it. But you can't say they're wrong. You see the problem there? Is that rails against what? Your moral experience, right? So some philosophers, I'm not a Reformed epistemologist, but a lot of Reformed epistemologists would say that you don't have to have an argument to know that, say, raping the child is wrong.
It's the same argument I've heard of.
They would say they would call that a properly basic belief. It's called a properly basic belief.
Helicopter pilots know that if you got your helicopter stuck in a tree, you fucked up. I don't need to
Right.
be an expert.
Right, or you don't have to give an argument as to why. You just know there's some things you can know, and then maybe later you can figure out, your warrant or justification. The Reformed epistemologists would say, but they would say you can look at an event you can see an event like the kidnapping and rape of the child, and know that that's absolutely wrong without necessarily having to give some freaking philosophical argument for it. Right? That's what they would say. Now that's similar to, but not exactly like I said, I'm not a Reformed epistemologist, but that is similar to the classical position that right now I can think that reality exists, right, if I can just show your arguments to be self-defeating in some way, or not necessarily true. So in the same way, I can know that raping a child and kidnapping and all this kind of stuff of a child is wrong, right? Without necessarily going through some philosophical argument for it. But the problem is the theist wants to point out with that argument, with that version of the moral argument, is that if materialism or physicalism or an atheistic version of evolution is true, then there just is no real right and wrong. So if Hitler's culture wins, that's just survival of the fittest. You may not like it. Sorry. Suck it up. You're just weak. His culture wins, survival of the fittest. It wasn't right. It wasn't wrong. It just is what it is. It's just nature. It's just nature doing its thing. It's just evolution taking its course. You see why that argument is a lot of times one of the most powerful arguments for God's existence? Now, again, what are some of the objections? One of the objections is what? Rationalism, right? Well, we don't need God. We can show that there are real rights and wrongs with solely the intellect, right? We can show like Kant or whoever. But it seemed like the problem then, the theist would say, is that why do you have any moral obligation to be what? To be rational.
I mean, it's the same thing though as saying.
And, well, then the harder part, and then go ahead, Piper, was that, but you're already assuming it to be rational as what? To be good. But that's supposed to be what it tells you. That's a circular argument. You can't say that it's good to be rational and then say that rationalism can get us to the good. Does that make sense? Because now you're just arguing in a circle. And again, if you go back to, the theist would say, if you go back to say like you have one ape or primate that's more intellectual than the other ape or primate, what if the less intellectual or less, intelligent primate says, I don't care about your argument, I'm going to punch you in the face or whack you with my club or whatever and take your stuff? Who is he obligated to? Well, but I'm more rational. No, this is right. I don't care. Take your stuff. So anyway, that's why that argument is you really have to wrestle with that. This is one of those things too. This is another thought experiment. I saw this a few years ago. I really liked a lot because I felt like it was good in the sense of it really tries to show whatever side you end up on there. It really tries to show a thought experiment in regards to our morality. It's kind of disturbing. It's not as bad as say something like Deliverance. If you've seen that movie. Who's seen that movie? Pretty rough stuff, right? I watched that this weekend. I'm like, why am I watching that? Anyway, so this is a thought experiment like that, but it's not obviously that rough, but it can be kind of disturbing. So prepare yourself, and then we'll talk about it. This is, by the way, this video it's called Cruel Logic. It's called Cruel Logic. It's by a guy named Brian Godalva, I think. Volume up and blast this out. Can you guys see that? Or we need to turn another light off? Can you see that?
Wakey, wakey. Hello, Dr. Pomeranke. I heard your lecture tonight at the college, criminal biology. DNA, instinct, and aggression. It's a well thought out presentation, but a bit abstract. Too academic, if you ask me. What I want to know is, have you ever really lived out your theory? Or are you content writing your papers inside your ivory tower, torturing your captive audience of students with your intellectual posture? I'm here to test your hypothesis. You're a sociobiologist, are you not? Yes. Well, in your lecture, you argued for the genetic origins of crime. Biology determines behavior. Well, I'd like to debate you on that. What do you mean, debate? You know, dialectic. I make a proposition, you counter, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Only in this debate, the stakes are real. If you win, I'll let you go. If I win, it's part of the proposition. What proposition? The issue resolved. There is no valid reason why I should not kill you. Debating for the negative, Professor Palmer. And for the affirmative, yours truly. You are going to kill me. Please. I'll do anything you say. Stimulus. Response. Please don't kill me. Give me one good reason. It's illegal. Murder is illegal. Go to jail. I don't plan on being caught. But it's wrong to kill. Professor, don't go getting all warm on me. You said that our DNA determines our behavior. DNA has no morality. It's abnormal. Your DNA is abnormal. Abnormality has to do with statistical averages, Professor, not right or wrong. If society agrees killing is wrong. Society is another word for statistical average. We're not all from the same gene pool. But does it make it right? And it doesn't make it wrong. Our species won't survive if we allow killing. Even you won't survive. I will. Me, to my DNA. You're a sick man. Your mind is diseased. Correction. I'm a genetically determined man with a biological predisposition toward aggression. Killing is in my genes, all according to your theory. Which brings us back to the central question. If all that I am is genetically determined, why should I not in fact kill you, when I am scientifically bound by my DNA to do so? Please have mercy. Take pity, I beg you. There's no mercy or pity these genes. I'm a predator. By nature. No! Please! I beg you! Please! Beggars can't be choosers, Professor. No survival rate. And I think it's time you know this. Ideas, you see, have consequences.
All right, so what kind of argument is that? What kind of argument is that? It's called a what? Or reductio ad absurdum, right? And remember, we've talked about this before. Your mom uses these arguments, right? You just didn't know there's a name for them. He just reduces to, what does this mean? What does that mean? Reduce to the absurd. Meaning that if that sociobiologist, if what he's saying is true, and then the reasons he gives for saying that that's true, if you can take that premise or take that conclusion and then show an absurd consequence or a false consequence, a contradictory consequence or result, then you're trying to show what? That your argument must be false, right? So what was the example your mom always gave? You said, Mom, can I go to this party? Why should I let you go to the party? Well, because everybody's going to the party. And so what was your mom's response? If everybody's jumping off a bridge, would you jump off a bridge? And then you say, Mom, that's stupid. But that was the point, right? It is stupid. Why? Because your mom has what? Reduced to the absurd what? Your reasoning. Because you were the one that gave the reason what? What was your reason for going to the party? Right. So your mom took your reasoning, using your logic, all right? If it's good enough to prove that you can go to a party, because everybody's doing it, if that's your logic behind it, then we'll put it over here and we'll see how that results, what that results in. So when you said, Mom, you're stupid, like, right, that was the point. She took your reasoning, put it over here, and your reasoning gave you an absurd conclusion, right? Well, just because everybody jumps off a bridge, you wouldn't jump off a bridge. That's dumb, right? But that was your reasoning. I used your reasoning. That was the point. So this whole thing right here is he takes the reasoning of that professor who argues what? Which is right now the dominant theory in our culture, so to speak, in regards, to philosophy and all that. What does he argue? What does the professor in that video argue? You may have heard it this way. We said it the other day when we were talking about. Remember when Dawkins says that the other day when we were reading our stuff? DNA just is, and we leave out all the stuff. That's what ellipses are for. We're leaving out some stuff there. DNA, we just dance to its music. Right? That professor's arguing that, right? But then all of a sudden what happens? So what's the point? The first is that if you are just molecules in motion, right, if you are just a collocation of atoms, then what are you? You just are that, right? That's just what you are. right, according to this argument here. Now, what the antagonist in that little video, the bad guy, he asked the professor immediately what? He asks him what? Why should I not, right? But he asked him what? He says, I want to see if you can, live out your theory. So he's challenging the existential import of that theory, right? Meaning what? Is your theory livable? Can you live this out? Can you truly believe this up here? Can you truly believe that we're molecules in motion, that we dance to the music of our DNA, that we just are at rock bottom, just animals? If you truly believe that, can you take that over here and now live that way? In this video, could the professor live that way? Why? What was he doing? Well, he was trying to show that what the guy was doing was what? So his moral intuition, if you want to put it that way, was raging against what? His theory, his own belief. Because he said he believes this, but then what happened? It's completely inconsistent, right? Now, does that mean that theory's wrong? Not necessarily. But should that be a red flag? Right, so for instance, parallel, situation, but a different train of, or a different topic, different genre, but parallel. If you have a belief system that says reality is an illusion, but then you live every day within reality, and you act like it's not an illusion, you can't live what you say you believe, right? Does that make sense? Now, does that mean that's wrong? No. But it should at least be a what? A red flag. If you can't even live out your theory in any shape, form, or fashion, then it should be at least a red flag for you to check your theory. Does that make sense? So, what else goes on in this video here? When he tries to give arguments or reasons to why what he was doing was wrong, what does the bad guy do there, the sociopath? What does he do? Yeah, he just keeps saying, like, this is your theory. I'm just doing what you say is the truth, right? But then when the guy tries to argue against it, what does the guy do? Right, he rebuts him, but how? Like, specifically, what does he do?
His own theory.
Right, with his own theory. Now, again, is that wrong what the sociopath's doing? Yes, it's wrong. But will that theory get you to that? No. That can't get you there. That's the whole point of the theistic argument, is if you really want to claim that's wrong, this will not get you to it. So you can, if you want, do what? You can abandon that that's wrong. You can say, all right, I'll just abandon that that's objectively wrong, that that's truly quote-unquote evil, and just maintain this, right? But if that theistic argument runs, the one we've been talking about since Thursday or whatever, then you can't simultaneously hold both of those, right? That's the point. The theistic argument is saying those are contradictory positions. This will not get you to the belief that what's going on there is truly, really, truly wrong. That won't get you there. That's what the point of the argument is, right? Same thing with the example of the child last week. That will not get you to that. And then they also want to argue that rationalism can't get, granted, better, but still can't get you to that, right? That's the point of their argument. Anything else? Who likes that video? Did anybody enjoy that? I like that a lot.
It was a good, the idea that was good, the acting was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like what stood out to me was that the acting was terrible. The idea was great.
Well, it's just a thought experiment, right? That one guy was in some big show. I remember the first time I showed that, everybody in the class was like, that guy's in so-and-so, like some show. I was like, I don't know what that is. But I was kind of like, dang it. I'd rather it be some no-name so they don't get distracted. The whole time they're like, I can't believe that he's in what's some show? Anyway, Piper will Google it for us, what show the guy's in later. That's your homework today, later. Not right now. Don't do it right now. Wait till you go home, then Google it.
I play out 15 seconds.
Some guy, that guy's in there. Anything else on that? Nothing? I want you guys to say something, because some of your reflection papers, you know, you offered up different stuff. I guess we can go ahead and talk about the Euthyphro dilemma. Even though this I think fits a little bit better with a specific ethical theory. But the Euthyphro dilemma, again, like I said, is from the time of Plato, and it's supposed to be this dialogue where a guy named Euthyphro is in dialogue with another guy. And they're trying to talk about what grounds the right or wrong or whatever. And the only reason I mention this is because right now this is one of the only objections to that. And, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, just kind of how, you know, whatever your particular angle is, it's just been, quote unquote, solved for a very long time, but it's still offered up as if it's, you know, valid, and it's just not. I mean, there are some that still argue the point, but for the most part, it's just been conceded within the, you know, again, the quote-unquote official literature. But anyway, the Euthyphro dilemma just basically says this. Does anybody know it? Does anybody know the Euthyphro dilemma? It essentially just says that, let me erase this. So Euthyphro and this dude or whatever, they're walking around, and he's actually on trial or whatever. He's about to be on trial for doing something or whatever. So they're trying to talk about the good, the right, the just, all those kind of things. Like, what is it? What grounds it, right? That's what they're saying. Well, so the one guy says basically the same thing the theists say. They say, like, look, God grounds objective good and right and wrong, that kind of stuff. And so the dilemma is, what is a dilemma? Remember when we talked about logic? What is a dilemma? What's a dilemma? It's a form of argument. You're either left with what? It starts with a disjunctive, right? Either this or that, right? Remember, that's just disjunctive syllogism. You got either this or you got that. If this, then blah, blah, blah is the result. So it takes the form of a disjunctive syllogism and a hypothetical syllogism, or even maybe a modus ponens or modus tollens, meaning that you start with an either or, either this or that. Well, if it's this, what's your clue when I say if this, then this, right? So that's a valid argument, right? Considering the rules are broken. You've either got this option, what's the or, which is what? Law of excluded middle, disjunctive syllogism, right? Either this or that. This is supposed to be the power of a dilemma. Well, and it is the power of a dilemma. But if it's this option over here, remember your either or, if it's this option, then, if then, this is your result. However, on the other hand, let's go with your option over here. Either this or this. If it's on the or side, if it's this thing, if this, then this. Well, this and this is your option. So it's basically saying, like, you've got either this or this. If this is what happens, this is what it entails. If this is what happens, this is what it entails, right? And these are supposed to be what? Your end result over here, your end result over here. What are they supposed to do? Contradict one another, right? Like you've got hence a dilemma, right? So the Euthyphro dilemma, if God is supposed to be what grounds the good, or if God is, you know, this is how we know the good is because God or whatever, the Euthyphro dilemma says, as these guys are talking, it comes out, this is essentially it, it says, well, wait a minute, is what is good, the good, is that determined by God? is it determined by God what is good? And then here, that's your first either, supposed to be your first either option, right? Now here's your if-then of that. Here's your what that entails, the if-then. Does God determine what's good? Because if God determines what's good, then good is just arbitrary. Meaning what? What does arbitrary mean? Right, could be this, could be that, right? Like it's arbitrary that we drive on the right side of the road as opposed to the left, right? Why? Why is that arbitrary? Right, it just as easily could have been the law that we what? Drive on the left side of the road, right? We just arbitrarily picked a side. You know, it doesn't really matter. Now, the point of that is supposed to be that if God says what is good, then it's arbitrary. Why? Because God could have said what? Murder's good. Right, then you would just, everybody would think murder's good, right? Or God could have said rape is good, and then everybody would think that was good, right? Well, the problem with that supposedly what is what? Well, then there's what is good? What does it even mean for something to be good if God could just choose or pick or whatever? He just says, well, this is good or this is bad, right? Because he could just the next day it could be the opposite, right? That doesn't seem to be satisfactory, right? Yeah, at best it's not consistent, right? Or at worst, I mean, at best it's not consistent. At worst, it's just completely arbitrary. It's like driving on the right side or the left side of the road. Right. It just doesn't matter. It really just doesn't matter, right? Now the other horn of the dilemma, because remember, dilemma wants to put you on two horns, right? The bull here. This is my best bull impersonation right there. First one of the dilemma, arbitrary.
First world problem.
Right. The second horn of the dilemma is what? Does anybody know? Remember, our first was, does God just decide what is good? Right? That was your first either, and then the if-then statement under it that shows the ramifications of that. The other side is, or does God call that which is good because it already is good? You catch that? Or does God say what is good? Does God call that which is good because it just already is good? Essentially what? Does God recognize that something is good? So essentially that God agrees that something is or isn't good. Does that make sense? What's the problem there?
Then God doesn't determine what's good.
God, well, not just that God doesn't determine what's good, but what? But there's some standard above God, right? Because God recognizes the good and calls it for what it is. But if God recognizes the good and calls it for what it is, then it's what? And there's a standard by which God is over or is under, right? What's the problem there for the theist? Specifically the monotheist. God just supposed to, there's not anything supposed to be God that God's subject to, right? God is supposed to be the end-all, be-all, right? He's not supposed to be subject to anything. Does that make sense? But now you've got, if God recognizes, calls something good because it just is good, well then now you've got a standard that seems to be over and above God in some shape, form, or fashion. Does that make sense? So this is supposed to be your other horn. Standard above God. So the first horn of your dilemma is God determines what's good and says what is or isn't good. Well, it's just arbitrary. First horn of your dilemma. Second horn is, but if that's not the case, if it's not God that he just willy-nilly picks what is or isn't good, well then now you're supposedly left with this. Well then now that there's a standard above God.
So either if it's based off God, it's arbitrary, and if it's not based off God, it's...
Well, if it's based off God's fiat, if it's based off His will, then it's arbitrary because God could He could pick this, He could pick that. On the other hand, if it's not just based off God's will, then what?
It's standard.
Right, then He's recognizing some standard. Now, a true dilemma is a contradiction, right? Are these contradictory? Are these contradictions? Are these A and not A? Is that A and not A? No, not really. Why? Because arbitrary be not arbitrary, right? Or standard above God and not standard above God. Remember, you've got to have two contradictory positions for it to be a true dilemma. So if they're not contradictory, in logic, how do you say you get around this kind of thing, a dilemma? You can either, the way you get around this is you can either take one of the horns of the dilemma, or you split the horns of a dilemma. What do you think that split the horns of a dilemma means in logic?
You're in the third option.
Right, just the third option. What do you think that means, Piper? So really, this is more like A and B. You've got A option, B option. So what might you, Piper says you want to add options, we'll say C. So what do you think that means logically speaking, Piper?
So you have to show that it's not arbitrary.
Or not arbitrary. I'm talking about just what's your answer about just showing there's a third option. What do you think that means? Logic, when we're talking about logically speaking.
Yeah, there could be even more options.
Right, if there's another option. Right? Now, does this option even have to be true? Why not? Why does this option not even have to be true? It can't be false, obviously, right? But it has to, in logic, it just has to be called what? Possible. Why? Because if that's possible, what happens to your dilemma?
There's a lot of options.
Then this isn't a real dilemma. It's what we call, right, or what do we call that in logic? A false dilemma. It's a false dilemma. What do you think that this option is here, this third option? And again, this is thousands of years old. It's not like just some dude just came up with this yesterday. What do you think this possible third option is? This is what theists have said for centuries. In answer to the Euthyphro dilemma. Come on, guys, use your brains. If any of you have had any sort of theistic background, it should probably jump out at you.
I did, but it's not.
But it's not.
Same here, but like I can't think of it.
Well, the theist would say, or theists have said for centuries, what? They bridge this, they give you this third option. And this is actually going to be dealt with a couple
That
different
God
ways.
sets the standard.
Again, that was supposed to be arbitrary, right? If God just sets it based on His will, right?
That God is the standard, that God is true.
Well, all right, so you're getting close. So I'm just going to give you the most popular one, because remember, all you have to have is one. I kind of fall into not necessarily this camp here. But I'm going to give you the most popular option to that. And the most popular option to that, or the most standard third possible alternative, is just what? Zima, you were both kind of touching on it. In fact, you both kind of touched on different aspects of the exact same answer. So you kind of have to mesh what you said and what you said.
What do you mean trying to live up to the standard that He is God?
Not live up. It'd be this. This is one of your logically possible third alternatives. Is that God commands what? In accord with what? Your part. Piper's part is God commands in accord with your part. What? Himself. That God is the good. Does this make sense? All right, so it's this. The standard by which God commands by is His own nature. Does that make sense? God's nature is the standard. So, is there a standard over and above God? No. Why? According to this theistic response. Why? Not sets. He is the standard. So then when God commands in accord with this, is it arbitrary? Why is it not arbitrary?
Because He
Because He can't command what? He can't command what? Against his nature, against his standard. So God's commands are not arbitrary, and there's no standard above and beyond himself. God commands in accord with his own nature, which is the standard. Now, does that even have to be true? Doesn't have to be true. It just has to be what? It just has to be logically possible, right? Now, is that true? Logically speaking, it just has to be possible. It just has to be logically possible. You can look up some more of that if you want to go deeper with that. A guy named William Alston, philosopher. But anyway, that's called the Euthyphro dilemma. And again, fortunately or unfortunately, whichever side of the aisle you kind of stand on here, this is still offered as a rebuke to, or a rebuttal to God being moral or immoral or whatever, that kind of thing, moral argument. And again, depending on whatever side of the aisle you stand on, fortunately or unfortunately, that's just been answered for a long time. And again, it doesn't even have to be true. So there has to be a different argument. Now again, there are some that will continue to try to press that, and you can look into that. You know, if you're interested in that, I'd recommend that you look into that for those that might want to continue to try to press that. But by and large, again, most don't, just because there's a possible alternative. But you can look at it if you want. Anything else on that? On the Euthyphro dilemma? What was the point of that? What's the Euthyphro dilemma supposed to be? What's the point? I don't want you to leave and go, well, what was the point of that? What was the point? What's the point of the Euthyphro dilemma?
Because people use it. People use it a lot.
What's supposed to be what?
It's supposed to defeat.
An objection, right? It's supposed to be an objection to say the earlier theistic argument.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't option C then naturally entail that God is incapable of setting a standard?
Incapable of setting a standard?
Well, if he is just a standard, doesn't that leave the fact that he's no longer all powerful?
Right. That's where you try to get the omni versus omni paradoxes, right? So this is what it has to do, and then we'll talk about this. I'm glad you said that, because we're going to have to talk about that when we talk about one of the big objections to God's existence, the problem of evil. Because what does that supposedly leave?
That God created evil.
Not that God created evil, but what you just said. What?
He's not all powerful.
That he can't do something, right? So what do you think what do you think that's going to go after to say that God can't do something? Omni what? Omnipotence, right?
Not all powerful.
Right.
Well, because, I mean, I guess that logically goes what I'm saying. If he is supposed to be what's supposed to be an ultimate good, then there has to be an ultimate evil. At which point, you can't have one without the other.
No, not necessarily. Because evil is just what? What is evil? What is it? See, this is, again, one of those things like you think everybody knows until you ask what it is. It's kind of like saying, what is time? You know, like, what is it? What is evil? What is it? Anybody? Certainly, you guys know what evil is, right?
Well, I think it's an abstract concept. And without my point was, without one, you have no standard by which to base the other, and vice versa.
Well, depending on how you define that. So what is it? I know what I think it is, but I don't want to tell you. What do you think it is? What is evil? First, here's your first problem, right? If it even exists, like we were talking about a minute ago, if it even exists, then what's your first problem? If you can even coherently talk about it, then what's your first problem? Who believes evil's real? Show of hands. I think it's real. If evil's real, what's your first problem? Remember the whole, we are just DNA? What is there no such thing on that view? There's no such thing as evil. So, first, if you even think it's actually like it exists, there really is evil, then you're already running into problems if that's a view. Because now, how do you even define it on just materialism? What is it? Remember, nature just is, the naturalistic fallacy. You can't get an alt from an is. You see why I love philosophy? Because it forces you to think about stuff you run around talking about every single day that you just take for granted. Does that make sense? Like literally, the way in which you live your life every day, the most abstract, important principles that you operate on are the ones you think the very least about. How crazy is that? That's what drove me to philosophy. Honestly, that's what drove me completely to philosophy, was this stuff right here. How do I make sense of what I think is reality? Or can I even make sense out of it? Are there answers to any of this stuff? Not because it's ivory tower intellectualism, but because what? Because you live it every day. Every day you are living out these principles. You're banking on these principles. You're operating, your life is rotating around these principles. Like, think about these presidential elections. Like, everything, when you watch those things, when you listen to those things, everything that you are banking on, or, well, and I should say it this way, everything that you're evaluating those things on are philosophical principles that you use every day, that you think the least about because you're taking them so for granted. So, for instance, let's say that you're a Hillary supporter, or say that you're a Trump supporter, and you think the opposite person is saying stuff that's absolutely heinous or wrong. Does your worldview even allow you to say that? Think about that. Like, what if you were on one particular side of a worldview where you truly believe that we're just DNA, we're blah, 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 whatever the case may be, and yet one particular candidate you think is doing evil things? You say, they don't even coincide. It's radically inconsistent, or vice versa. But you're living that way every day. Like the stuff that you hold to be most important, the stuff you think the very least about. Is that not crazy? Like, oh, I hate Trump because he's evil. Oh, I hate Hillary because she's evil. And then, what is evil? Nobody. I don't know. Is that not nuts? I can't stand what that candidate is because it's wrong. What is wrong? You're banking your life on it. You can't even tell me what it is. That's crazy. That's not, again, that's not ivory tower intellectualism, you know, some philosopher sitting off in a room somewhere. That's what you're living every day. You're judging other people by those concepts and don't even know what they are. Is that not crazy? Again, that's what drove me like a madman to philosophy. I was like, there's got to be answers to this stuff. Like, this has I've got to figure out. This has to make sense. Basically, what? To critically examine what? Your worldview. Like, can the way in which I view reality, can that withstand intellectual scrutiny? Does it even hold up when it's questioned? And not just questioned in some, again, rhetorical soundbite sort of Facebook silliness, but like when hard questions are pressed against your worldview, will it stand? Does it make sense? Is it coherent? Is it inconsistent? Can you live it? How do you evaluate it? So, anyway, that's why, I think that philosophy's fun. That's why it's fun. I mean, obviously, sometimes it's not fun because you come to conclusions that you don't necessarily like or necessarily want to come to, but then sometimes you may come to conclusions that you're glad of and that you do like because you found that they can stand at the end of the day. Anything else? All right. Guys, on your reflection papers, some of you are bombing this class. I mean, bombing it. I don't mean like, well, yeah, I've got up to 69, I'll be all right. I mean like 30, 20, like on your, just because you're not turning in stuff. Remember, like at least I thought, like I designed this class because one, it's an elective, it's not required. And I wanted you to enjoy it, right? I want you to enjoy this class. Like, I don't want it to be something that basically you have to go home and stress about. Like, oh, I've got this paper due, I got that. Like, all you have to do is write about what we talked about in class and think about it. That's it. Guys, if you're failing this class, that's insane. Remember, somebody, real quick, what is the rule for your reflection paper? Anybody?
One page, single space type.
Right, that's it.
Your thoughts.
Right, your thoughts. Some of your thoughts, guys, honestly, I want to send in to Saturday Night Live and be like, hey, read these on the air because they're so funny. But guess what you get them? Guess what your paper gets if you do that? Most incoherent, hilarious comedy sketch I've ever heard. What does your paper still get? 100. If what? One page, single space, full time. That's it. I mean, that's easy. You can literally say the most innocuous, asinine thing on the. Oh yeah.
Because I basically just say what you said. You want to know.
No, they're not saying that. That's my point. Like they're saying like, oh, I think it's aliens, and I mean like you blow your mind what people are saying.
Okay.
But the point is, you could say.
Do we have like a daily share?
Now he's interested. He's like, who the hell is going on?
Yeah, like what class were you in? Now some of them are really, really, really good, and then some of them are again hilarious. But again, you still get 100, right? Even if they're hilarious.
Great.
Yeah, you can see them anytime you want. And then also too, guys, does anybody know when your midterms are for any other courses?
I have.
They should be coming up within like 2 or 3 weeks,
I
right?
have both my history one and my communications coming up on this Thursday.
This coming, like this next one?
This exact Thursday, right after tomorrow.
Okay. All right, so with that said, everybody listen in real quick, because what I'm trying to do is I want your midterms in here to be, basically the same time as your other ones, so you don't get off. What is your midterm in here? Does anybody remember?
Present an argument or write a 7-page paper.
Right. So you can make it, you just get up here, anything that we've talked about in class, right, is open game, right? Anything we've talked about. Meaning you give up here, you give your argument for anything, pro or con, for anything we've said, right? Now, what if your argument's terrible, but you still follow the basic rubric? You'll still do fine, right?
So when I say that God doesn't exist, so like chocolate ice cream, that'll work.
Well, I mean, it has to be coherent. I mean, it can't be just completely illogical.
I'm like scared to death of it. I still plan on doing a presentation, but I keep like.
No, that's,
Well, what does it do?
I'm like worried about it.
that's what I'm saying. So we're going to start first already. Like, if you want to go ahead and do it, I mean, you can do it anytime you want. So if you want to walk in Thursday and do it, you can. I mean, it's open to you anytime you want to do it. But we're going to try to shoot for, when did you say your first final is? Our
This
midterm?
Thursday, I have two after.
All right, so we're going to, not this Thursday then, but next. Let's start looking at that. towards people coming in and doing your thing. Again,
Do you need anything typed in there?
yeah, just have, you can use handwritten notes, you can have typed notes, just so I know that you're not walking up here and just basically making up something right off the bat, right? So, not this Thursday, but the next Thursday, let's start at least have a couple of you guys do it. And again, if you want to do it earlier than that, if you want to do it Tuesday, or you want to do it this Thursday, you know, in a day Thursday, 2 days Thursday, then you can.
All right, how long does that be?
Remember, 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
And remember, a lot of that can be eat up just by you responding to objections from your class and me, right? So, I mean, don't bank on that. Don't be like, well, I'm not going to say anything, and then just hope that they all just talk. I mean, you at least want to be able to talk for at least a good 5 minutes, right? Which is still easy. But remember, just go back and look at your syllabus and look at the rubric for that. You'll see what we're looking for. It's not, again, the whole point is to not be hard, right? The whole point is so you won't be stressed. But at least so you'll have to give up and give some sort of coherent argument. Any other questions real quick? Also, let me just say this. If you haven't missed any days in class so far, then I will at least substitute 1 or 2 of your reflection papers. I mean, and those are huge because, again, just not doing them is big. I've got a person in this class right now that has, they've turned in every reflection paper, every single one of them except one. They have 1 0. So what's that, 6 or 7? 6 or 7 reflection papers? They've got 1 0 and their grade is an 85. Maybe because they just missed 1. So again, just turn it in. Just turn in. Even if you're laying in the bed and you're like, I don't want to do this, just write out. I was in class today and we talked about blah, 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 and we said this and I agree with that, but I don't agree with it. Like, just turn it in. Like, turn it in.